Finally, even though it was a marginal move, we finally saw something materialize on the NBA trade market before the deadline comes on Thursday. And I believe this is going to be one of the precursor moves, some of these smaller moves that we may see kind of trickle in through the deadline. But it is something to keep an eye on as two teams in the NBA, the Los Angeles Clippers and Utah Jazz, made a trade today that definitely helps out both teams. We're going to be diving and looking at all of that and more on this episode of Swish City. I'm Bruce Velez. Without further ado, let's get into it and let's dive into the trade. So if we want to look at this trade report, we saw from Shams Charania some news break this afternoon between the Los Angeles Clippers and the Utah Jazz, in which the Clippers are trading PJ Tucker and Mo Bamba, plus a future second round pick and cash to the Utah Jazz for Drew Eubanks and Patty Mills. And if we want to kind of discuss and kind of look at this trade, it's obviously a smaller one that is, on the smaller edges here and involving a Utah Jazz team, a team that is looking to add capital, but is something to definitely keep an eye on for both teams in the direction that they want to head forward. For the Clippers, it's a team that wants to make a playoff push, and adding a nice backup big to play alongside Ivica Zubac is a hole that they need. So going out and acquiring a player like Drew Eubanks could be a nice addition for that. And for Utah, they're obviously a team that has a lot of young players, a lot of players on their team that are just kind of middle players as well, some veterans as well, and they are looking to move off of some of those guys to get younger. If we want to look at the trade itself, like I mentioned, Drew Eubanks going from the Utah Jazz to the Los Angeles Clippers is adding some nice depth for this Clippers bench unit as that backup big man. Last season, he did not play great for the Phoenix Suns, but this year has been pretty solid as a backup big for the Utah Jazz, and once again, could just be a small replacement piece for Mohamed Bamba. Now, Bamba, unfortunately, has been able to find his role in the NBA, but that is okay for Mo Bamba. Drew Eubanks is going to be going over and taking care of. And the Clippers also add Patty Mills. And Patty Mills was a veteran point guard add late in the free agency signing period to the Utah Jazz, as he was just going to be a guy to just help out and materialize some of these younger guards and Keontae George, Isaiah Collier, and be a nice little mentor. But now is getting shipped off to the Clippers to, provide some end of the bench help if needed. I don't expect Patty Mills is going to be, getting 8 to 10, maybe possibly even 12 minutes a game, but could be, a fringe bench rotational player, a guy that's viewed as, a ninth, 10th man, as a situational piece, depending on if the Clippers need some more offensive spark at that point guard position. Adding a guy like Patty Mills definitely helps them out. Now let's look at what the Utah Jazz got, as the Clippers are obviously going and adding two of these better players here to kind of go in for win now to kind of help compete for their playoff push, like I mentioned. Now, for the Utah Jazz, like I mentioned, they're towards the bottom of the Western Conference. And even though they have a player in Lauri Markkanen who's very, very talented, they also have a lot of young pieces and a lot of pieces that also necessarily haven't really panned out or grown. And I think that's where Utah wants to kind of invest in some of these guys, going in on some guys that possibly haven't had, the best career, or maybe are getting pushed out of some of their rotation roles, and maybe they could potentially be pieces for Utah. And that's what they're striking with Bamba here. Now, Bamba has had a career with multiple teams around the league trying to be a center, was the 6th overall pick by the Orlando Magic, never lived up to his true potential, and has been struggling as a backup big for the Clippers. But maybe he could find himself a little bit of a real revitalization role here in Utah. With the Utah Jazz, they do have a lot of bigs on this roster with Walker Kessler, Kyle Filipowski, and now adding Mo Bamba. But I do expect Bamba to see some rotational minutes sporadically here and there, and possibly be used as a guy to be, just tested on to see if he could find a long-term home in Utah. And then lastly, as we all know, they went and acquired PJ Tucker. And the Clippers have been trying to move off of PJ's contract since last season, but unfortunately, with the Clippers having him have a one more year on his deal, it was very, very difficult for the Clippers team to send off PJ Tucker. But the Utah Jazz, they obviously are a team that is pretty bad. They'll take on some bad contracts. They will take on a contract in PJ Tucker and most likely buy PJ Tucker out. There hasn't been any word on the situation if he has been bought out at this very moment as I'm recording at 2:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday afternoon. But if PJ Tucker does get bought out, a lot of teams will be interested in picking PJ Tucker up as he makes under the non-tax mid-level exception, for which, if you guys do not know, is a $12.4 million avalanche kind of set in at the salary cap, where if you are a second apron team or a first apron team, you cannot re-sign players that make over that $12.4 million. But obviously, with him being underneath that, those second and first apron teams can then pursue a player in PJ Tucker. So PJ Tucker can be picked up by any team across the league and would be a guy I'd keep an eye on for maybe a team adding as a veteran bench presence, as a veteran minimum contract after the deadline expires. PJ Tucker could also be rerouted to another team. He could also stay on this Utah Jazz roster. So not everything has been kind of solved with that scenario, but PJ Tucker is definitely a name to keep an eye on with this Utah Jazz team, as he could go and help out some other contenders across the league as a, minimal bench piece. The one thing that I did not have a screenshot for, and one thing I do want to preface when kind of talking about this deal, is that the Clippers actually helped themselves a lot in this deal by moving off of Mo Bamba and moving off of PJ Tucker, obviously sending out PJ Tucker's $11 million contract. The Clippers kind of freed some cap flexibility with themselves, where they dropped underneath both aprons and now have ultra flexibility to bring in any free agent that they want on the buyout market. And once again, for the Clippers, this is just another key thing that they're looking for as a team that is kind of fighting for a playoff spot in the Western Conference, being able to add talent from bought out players across the league or from players that may necessarily won't be on some of these teams by the end of the trade deadline. The Clippers can kind of engage and get some of those guys, or they can survey that free agent market to pick up some guys that didn't get deals. Guys like possibly Lonnie Walker could be available on a buyout, possibly Markelle Fultz, Dennis Smith Jr. All those guys could be a possible name that the Clippers could ultimately pursue and bring on in as extra free agents. For this trade, I ultimately think it is a win-win for both. We've already seen with the Utah Jazz, they have made moves with the Suns to get their 2031 first round pick. The Utah Jazz do not want to compete. They do not want to contend. They'll take on bad contracts. And this is where I think around the trade deadline, we're going to see some of these other bad contracts around the league ultimately get moved into dumping grounds. Teams like Brooklyn, teams like Utah, Washington, Portland, if they can free up the cap space, if they can ultimately take on some contracts to get some extra draft capital, they ultimately will do. And I could see that kind of materializing with some other trades as well, getting closer and closer to the deadline. The Jazz, I think, did a perfect job getting back, getting rid of two players that weren't part of the long-term future, weren't going to be here for next season, at least. Even if Eubanks was extended, they weren't realistically wanting to play him, and moving off of him to a Clippers team who could use those services of players in Patty Mills and Drew Eubanks around the edges for getting some extra draft capital. And for the Clippers, it's obviously a win-win as they upgrade in two pieces at the backup center and adding an additional guard, while also moving off the money in PJ Tucker that they've been wanting to move off of since last season, and ultimately gives them some more flexibility heading into the trade deadline in the buyout market. I want to know your thoughts. I want to know who you guys think won this trade down below in the comment section. So let me know what you guys ultimately think, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a great rest of your day, and peace out, everyone.